want to start today by asking you a bit of a strange question, and I want you to really just sit with it for a second. If you strip away your job, your house, the laws that stop you from running red lights, and just the polite society we live in, what are you left with? Are you, at your core, a peaceful person who just wants to get along, or is there something else lurking in the hard wiring?
Yeah, that's really the oldest question in the book, isn't it? Are we broken angels or rising apes?
Right, exactly. And usually when we ask that on this show, we're talking about philosophy or, maybe evolutionary biology. But today we are looking at it through a much grimier lens. We are doing a deep dive into the anatomy of conflict, the history of us killing each other. And I have to say, looking at the stack of research we have for this one, it's heavy.
It is heavy. I mean, it's a brutal topic, but it's unavoidable. You really can't understand human history if you sanitize the violence. It is essentially the ink that the history books are written in.
And unfortunately, this isn't just a history lesson. I was reading the Global Peace Index 2025 report this morning, and the trajectory is, it's not good. They're using this phrase throughout the report, the Great Fragmentation. It sounds like the title of a dystopian novel.
It does, yeah. But it captures the reality of the data perfectly. We aren't just seeing a temporary spike in war. We are seeing a fundamental fracturing of the global order. The data shows that global peacefulness have deteriorated every single year since 2014.
Which is wild.
Right, that is a decade-long slide. We aren't just having a bad year. We are trending downward in a systemic way.
I think people feel that, You open the news and it feels like the world is on fire in 12 different places at once. But I was genuinely shocked by the specific numbers. The report lists 59 active state-based conflicts right now.
Which is the highest number since the end of World War II. I mean, just think about that for a second. We lived through the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the chaos of the 90s, and yet right now, we have more states shooting at each other than at any point in the last 80 years.
And the human cost is staggering. Conflict deaths in 2024 alone hit 152,000, and the economic cost is just astronomical. I saw this figure, $19.97 trillion. That's the economic impact of violence in just the last year. That number is so big it doesn't even register as real money to me.
Let's put it in perspective. That is roughly 11.6% of the entire global GDP. Imagine if you took more than a tenth of everything the human race produced, every car, every bushel of weed, every software update, and just set it on fire. That is what that number means. It's resources that simply vaporized.
So the mission today is to figure out why. We aren't just going to list the wars like a sad timeline. We want to look past the headlines and understand the machinery of war. We're looking at the systems of power and the human record to understand why we fight, how it's evolved, and frankly, what it does to us.
To do that, we have to look at conflict as a system. It's not just, bad people doing bad things. We have to look at how power is organized, how economies work, and how the human mind processes threat.
So let's go back, way back. Because I think most of us have this idea, maybe it's from high school history or maybe it's just wishful thinking, that war is a modern invention. The noble savage idea. That before we built cities and invented capitalism, humans were these peaceful hunter-gatherers living in harmony with nature.
It's a beautiful idea. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the most famous proponent of it. He argued that society is what corrupted us, that in our natural state we are gentle. But archaeology has been very, very cruel to Rousseau's theory.
You're talking about Jebel Sahaba.
Jebel Sahaba is the smoking gun. It's an archaeological site in the Nile Valley. It dates back about 13,000 years. So to be clear, this is long before the pyramids, long before agriculture, long before anyone wrote down a law. It's a cemetery.
And what they found there is pretty horrifying.
They found dozens of skeletons. But they weren't people who died of old age or disease. A huge percentage of them, men, women, and children, had projectile points embedded in their bones, and not just one or two. Some had healed fractures from previous attacks, and then fresh wounds that ultimately killed them.
So this wasn't just a prehistoric bar fight that got out of hand.
No, not at all. The forensic analysis suggests this was organized, repeated, systemic violence. It was one group actively trying to wipe out another group over time. And remember, these were hunter-gatherers. They didn't have gold to steal. They didn't have cities to conquer.
That's the part that really gets me. If you don't have property, what on earth are you fighting for?
Survival. Resources were scarce. They were likely fighting over access to prime foraging territory or watering holes.
Mm-hmm.
But it completely disproves the idea that war requires civilization. Organized violence seems to be part of the human package from the very beginning. However, the nature of that violence changes drastically once we do start settling down.
Right, this is the Neolithic shift. When we figured out how to plant seeds.
Exactly. When you are a hunter-gatherer, if a stronger tribe comes along, you can run away. You pick up your spear and your baby and you move to the next valley.
Yeah.
But once you plant crops, you are stuck.
Yeah.
You can't put a wheat field in your backpack.
So you have to defend it.
You have to. The surplus, the grain in the silo, the livestock in the pen created a completely new incentive for war. War shifted from tribal raiding over honor or livestock to fighting over land and surplus. Now I can fight you not just because you're in my way, but because I want your stuff. And you have to fight to the death because if you run, you starve.
And that's exactly when we see the architecture change. I remember reading the source material about Jericho.
One of the oldest cities on Earth. And what is the defining feature of Jericho?
The walls. Massive stone walls.
Right. The very first time humans organized themselves into a city, their first priority was building a giant defensive barrier. That tells you everything you need to know about the anxiety of early civilization. They were terrified of what was outside. Defense was a primary architectural concern.
So we settled down, we built walls, and we started hoarding grain. But then we hit the Bronze and Iron Ages, and it feels like war leveled up. It went from being a survival necessity to a profession.
The industrialization of death. That's really what the Bronze Age, which is around 3300 to 1200 BCE, brought us. We see the rise of the first true empires. And with empires, you get the Assyrians.
The Assyrians are the stuff of literal nightmares. Reading the source material on them, it's just gruesome.
It is gruesome.
Yeah.
But we have to look past the gore to understand the strategy. The Assyrians were absolute masters of psychological warfare and political economy. They didn't just want to defeat an army, they wanted to terrify the population into submission so they wouldn't have to fight them again.
This is where the flaying comes in.
Yes. The Assyrian kings would skin the leaders of a rebellious city and hang their skins on the city walls. It's horrific to even imagine. But think about it from a systems perspective. It was a billboard. It was a communication strategy.
A communication strategy, that is a very clinical way to put it.
It's the truth, though. They were sending a message to every other city in the region: pay your taxes, send your tribute, and don't rebel. Or this happens to you. It ensured tax collection efficiency. Terror is a very cheap way to maintain order compared to keeping a massive garrison of soldiers in every single town.
So war basically became a tool of the state. It was about administration.
Precisely. But what's fascinating is that while this was happening in the Middle East, you had a completely independent evolution of war happening in Mesoamerica.
Right, the Aztecs and the Mayans. They were fighting constantly, but the focus was totally different. They didn't necessarily want to wipe out the enemy city or conquer their territory in the same way.
No, because then who would they sacrifice? In the Mesoamerican worldview, the universe was a fragile machine. It was a cosmological necessity. The sun would literally stop moving if it wasn't fed with human blood.
So war was religious.
Exactly. You went to war specifically for captive taking. If you killed everyone on the battlefield, you actually failed your mission. You needed live bodies to bring back to the temple for religious sacrifice. It's a perfect example of how culture dictates the shape of conflict. The violence is constant, but the rules of engagement depend entirely on what the society values.
That brings us to the classical turn, Greece and Rome. And this is where it feels like we start to see the modern military take shape. Discipline, formations, systems.
The Greeks gave us the concept of the phalanx and the hoplite. Men standing shoulder to shoulder, protecting the man next to them with their shields. War was a clash of citizen militias. It was very civic. But Rome turned war into engineering.
Rome didn't just beat you on the battlefield, they outbuilt you.
They did. They treated war as a massive construction project. They built roads to move troops faster than anyone else. They built forts every single night they marched. They built siege engines. But there's a deep dive data point from the Pax Romana that really blew my mind.
The budget numbers, right?
Yes. We talk about the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. We have this image of senators in togas debating philosophy and building aqueducts. But during that era, the Roman state budget was roughly 70% for the military.
70%? That's absurd.
And about 15% went to the dole, which was the public welfare, the free grain for the citizens.
So basically, the entire Roman Empire was just a giant army that occasionally handed out free bread.
That is exactly what it was.
Yeah.
The system was highly coercive. The peace wasn't natural. It was enforced by the most expensive and lethal machine the world had ever seen. And at the top of that machine was Caesar.
And this is a perfect segue because you can't really talk about Caesar without talking about power. And I don't just mean he was a strong guy. I mean the mechanics of control. We have this framework from the sociologist Michael Mann in our sources, taking a complex systems science approach, and I think it's incredibly useful here.
Mann's framework is essential for understanding why society is organized for war. He defines 4 distinct types of power that drive civilization. If you want to understand why a conflict starts, you have to look at these 4 pillars.
Okay, let's break them down for everyone. What's the first one?
The first is political power. This is authority transferred for group benefit. It's decision-making. We give a leader or a government the authority to say, we are going to build a bridge, or we're going to war.
Makes sense. Second.
Military power. This is power derived from threat or coercion. It's about avoiding harm. It's the guy with the spear or the tank. Do this or else.
Okay, third.
Economic power. This is power derived from reward or benefit. It's about subsistence and wealth. Do this, and I'll give you food or money or land.
And the fourth one, which I think is the most insidious.
Ideological power. This is the control over meaning, norms, and values. Religion, narratives, propaganda. It's the power to define what is good and what is evil.
So bringing it back to Rome, Caesar is this fascinating case study because he represented the consolidation of all forms of power.
Exactly. In ancient empires, powers were concentrated in one leader. God, emperors. Caesar was the general, which is military. He became the dictator, which is political. He controlled the treasury, economic. And eventually he was declared Pontifex Maximus and deified, which is ideological. When you consolidate all 4 sources of power in one place, you get an absolute empire.
But the historical trend over the last few centuries seems to be a progressive separation of these powers, right? In modern democracies, we have this idealized separation. Political leaders make policy, the military provides security, economic leaders manage production, and ideological leaders promote values.
That is the ideal, yes. But they never stay perfectly separated. And that's where we get into the blur. Where the lines cross is where modern conflict breeds. Think about regulatory capture.
Explain that for us.
Regulatory capture is economic power dominating political power. It's special interest. Imagine a governing agency designed to regulate banks. If the banks use their wealth to lobby the politicians or promise them lucrative jobs later, suddenly economic power is controlling political power.
And then you have corruption, which is the exact reverse of that.
Right. Corruption is political power dominating economic power. A politician using their office to extract wealth. You want a permit to build a factory, you have to pay me a bribe.
And theocracies.
That's ideological power dominating all the others, like the historical Crusades or Inquisitions or modern Iran. The ideological narrative dictates the military and political reality.
This connects directly to the modern data we have from CISPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. They looked at governance as a root cause, asking why internal conflicts are starting today. And it's not just that people are poor.
It's about governance failing. CISPRI identifies these root cause families, and one of the biggest is weak state capacity.
Which means the government is basically unable or unwilling to provide services.
Exactly. Can they fix the roads? Can they keep the lights on? Can they provide a fair court system? If the answer is no, the government loses legitimacy. And when the state creates a vacuum, someone else fills it. That leads to conflict.
There was another root cause they mentioned, exclusion. It's not just about poverty, it's about marginalization. And I thought the case study on the Somalia Youth Learners Initiative was fascinating because it was so counterintuitive.
Oh, it really is. It challenges a lot of assumptions. The assumption was that young men join violent groups because they lack education and jobs. So the initiative provided secondary education, thinking that would stop the violence.
But it didn't.
No. They found that secondary education alone didn't stop violence at all. In fact, if you just educate someone who is deeply marginalized, you might just be giving them the vocabulary to articulate their anger about being excluded.
So what actually worked?
Education plus civic engagement, addressing the exclusion. They found that when you gave these young people education and a way to actually participate in their community and have their voices heard, that is what reduced support for political violence.
That is a massive lesson. You can't just throw textbooks at a problem. You have to fix the systemic exclusion. I want to shift gears to the evolution of strategy and technology. We've talked about the systems of power, but the tools of war completely alter governance too. And the classic example here is the gunpowder revolution.
It wasn't just about better weapons, it completely changed who held power. Think about the feudal era. Feudal lords sat in these massive stone castles. The king couldn't really control them because the castle was almost impossible to take without a months-long siege. Power was incredibly decentralized.
Enter the cannon.
Enter the cannon. Suddenly, those stone walls are obsolete. Cannons shattered feudal castles, which meant the feudal lords lost their power. But cannons and cannon foundries were incredibly expensive. Only monarchs and centralized states could afford them.
So the technology forced power to centralize.
Exactly. It led directly to the military revolution between 1500 and 1789. You get the creation of professional standing armies, and the Tres Italienne, the star forts designed to withstand cannon fire. War became an industry of the state.
And that leads us to the rise of total war. We see this major psychological break with the Napoleonic Wars.
Napoleon introduced mass warfare and conscription. Before him, wars were largely fought by professionals or mercenaries. Napoleon brought in the idea of fighting for the patrie, the nation, rather than just a king.
Which sounds very patriotic, but it actually makes war much more devastating. And historian Castal Nolan argues that the U.S. Civil War was the beginning of true total war.
Right, because total war erases the line between combatant and civilian. Look at Sherman's March to the Sea. He wasn't just fighting the Confederate Army. He was destroying infrastructure, burning crops, twisting railroad lines. He was dismantling the economic and societal capacity of the South to make war.
And that philosophy is what gave us the horrors of the 20th century. World Wars I and II were just the logical conclusion of industrialization applied to human slaughter.
But going into WWI, leaders suffered from what we call the short war delusion.
This is wild to me. They really thought it would be quick.
They did. They looked at the new technology, railways, rapid-fire artillery, and they thought it would make everything decisive and fast. They completely misunderstood that technology like machine guns and barbed wire overwhelmingly favored the defense.
So instead of a quick war, they got a stalemate of attrition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then by WWII, you get strategic bombing and nuclear weapons. We introduce the concept of existential risk. We gain the ability to erase ourselves entirely.
Which brings up the strategic evolution. Our sources highlight two key thinkers here, Sun Tzu and Clausewitz.
They represent two very different approaches to conflict. Sun Tzu focused heavily on deception, intelligence, and avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. Winning without fighting is the ultimate goal.
Whereas Clausewitz
Famously said that war is the continuation of politics by other means. He placed a huge emphasis on the decisive battle. Though, as we just discussed with WWI, the decisive battle is often a myth.
That feels like a good place to talk about what all this violence actually does to us. The psychology of conflict. The source material calls it the silent epidemic. The psychological cost is the shadow of war.
And it's fascinating to track how our terminology for it has evolved. During the Civil War, they called it soldier's heart.
Which almost sounds poetic, but it was just unrecognized trauma. And then in WWI, it became shell shock.
They literally thought the concussive force of artillery shells was physically damaging the brain. It wasn't until the modern era that we fully codified it as PTSD. But the mechanisms of trauma are so deeply layered. It's direct exposure, obviously, witnessing death, but it's also displacement, the loss of your home and community.
And the research is getting even deeper into heritable trauma, the epigenetics.
This is some of the most profound research in the field. Studies on the children of Holocaust survivors and war evacuees show that trauma can actually alter gene expression. These children, who never saw the war themselves, show higher hospitalization rates for mood disorders.
So the trauma literally lives in the DNA. It's passed down.
Yes. But there's a paradox here. War destroys, obviously, but it also creates intense societal cohesion. It creates social glue.
The sources refer to the current conflict in Ukraine as a laboratory of resilience.
Exactly. You combine institutional resilience with massive civic mobilization. You see a society completely transforming under fire. People who never engaged in politics are suddenly risking their lives for their neighbors. War becomes this brutal crucible for national identity.
There's also an interesting note in the data about gender dynamics in trauma.
Broadly speaking, the sociological data shows men often externalize war trauma through substance abuse or aggression, while women tend to internalize it, manifesting as severe depression and anxiety. The shadow of war covers everyone, but it takes different shapes.
But before the war even starts, societies have to prepare psychologically. And that means propaganda. You have to create the other.
To get normal people to kill other normal people, you have to engage in dehumanization. You have to strip the enemy of their human traits to bypass our natural aversion to killing.
And it's not just old WWII posters anymore. There's modern context here. The research from the University of Bath on the culture of militarism.
Right. They looked at how entertainment, specifically movies and video games, shapes public consent for war. It normalizes it.
By visualizing violence as a clean, effective solution.
Exactly. You play a game, you shoot the bad guys, the problem is solved. It completely removes the trauma and the messiness. It primes a population to accept military intervention as a simple logical tool rather than a catastrophic failure of diplomacy.
That actually brings us to a really important section, because we have all these ideas about war from movies and games, and a lot of them are just myths. Let's do some myth busting.
I'm ready.
Myth number 1, the genius general. The idea that we have these great captains of history like Napoleon or Patton who win wars purely through tactical brilliance.
It's a great narrative, but historian Cathal Nolan argues pretty aggressively against it. Modern wars aren't won by tactical genius. They are wars of attrition. They are won by logistics and an industrial capacity.
He uses Stalingrad as an example.
Right. Stalingrad wasn't some tactical masterpiece. It was an industrial and demographic meat grinder. The Soviets won because they had the population depth to absorb horrifying losses and keep their factories churning out tanks. Attrition wins modern wars, not genius.
Okay, myth number 2, war is profitable.
A very persistent myth, but the truth is, wars are economic disasters for the participants.
The data on post-independence wars in India really proves this.
Yes, those conflicts caused India's GDP growth to dip by 1% to 2%. That's a massive destruction of wealth.
But people always point to the US in WWII as proof that war boosts the economy.
And that is a one singular exception. The US in WWII was uniquely profitable only because it was fought offshore. The US industrial base remained completely untouched while every single one of its competitors, Europe, Russia, Japan, had their infrastructure bombed into rubble. That's not a replicable economic strategy today.
Myth number 3, war is a bargaining failure. This is political scientist David Lake's theory.
This is a really elegant way to look at it. Lake argues that because war is so costly, any negotiated settlement should logically be preferable to fighting. So why do wars happen? Because of private information, secrets and bluffs.
Explain that using the Gulf War example.
In 1991, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. The U.S. threatened force. If Saddam had known the true extent of the U.S. capabilities, specifically the left hook maneuver that would encircle his forces, he likely would have withdrawn and negotiated. He fought because he lacked accurate information about his opponent's true strength. War is the brutal cost of failed negotiation and hidden information.
Which is a terrifying thought when you look at the current landscape. We are in the 2025-2026 timeframe, and things are incredibly volatile.
Conflicts are becoming hyper-internationalized. The Global Peace Index notes that 92 countries are currently involved in conflicts outside their borders. That is the highest number since the index began.
92 countries. That means local wars don't really exist anymore.
No. And Mary Kaldor's theory of new wars really defines this era. Wars are no longer just state armies fighting other state armies. Now you have a government fighting warlords, terrorists, criminal gangs, and proxy mercenaries, all in the same theater.
And the weapons have changed. We have to talk about asymmetric threats, cyber warfare, drones, the gray zone.
The gray zone is where states engage in aggressive actions that fall just below the threshold of traditional war. Hacking a power grid, election interference. It's incredibly dangerous because the rules of engagement are entirely undefined.
And hovering over all of this is the Thucydides trap.
Right, the fear of a rising power. Thucydides wrote about Athens rising and striking fear into Sparta, making war inevitable. Today, it's applied to the US and China.
The military scoring in the index noted that US capabilities are still roughly 3 times higher than China's, but the tensions are rising because the gap is perceived to be closing.
Exactly. It's that fear of the shifting balance of power that creates a deeply unstable geopolitical environment.
So wrapping this up, we've looked at the deep history, the systems of power, the psychology, the myths. What is the future here? Our sources offer 2 very different paths. One is the humanistic paradigm.
This is a new school of thought suggesting that AI, transparency, and global interconnectivity might force a shift in our consciousness. The idea that we have to move from a mindset of victory at any cost to global responsibility simply because our weapons are too destructive to use.
And the alternative?
The alternative is a future of permanent hybrid warfare where the distinction between peace and war is erased entirely. We just exist in a constant state of low-level, fragmented conflict.
It's a chilling thought. I want to leave everyone listening with a final provocative thought built on all this research. War is a human invention. It is not a weather event. It's not an earthquake. If we invented it, can we uninvent it? Or does this great fragmentation we're seeing suggest suggest that conflict is just the natural entropy of civilization, that it's inevitable unless we expend constant, exhausting effort to maintain order.
That is the ultimate question. We have to wonder if humanity can learn faster than it destroys.
I think that's exactly where we need to leave it today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you all next time. Keep exploring.